She didn't hesitate. Golf cart, full speed, my driveway. I was 60 miles away, watching the live feed on my laptop, when Renata Holbrook aimed that cart at my robot and floored it. Crack. Plastic exploded across the concrete. Aria 3 spun sideways, slammed into the mailbox post, and went completely dark, dead on impact. She parked, stepped out, looked down at the wreckage. 4 seconds, maybe 5, then straightened her cardigan and sneered.
How dare you put this piece of trash in front of my house?
No apology, no hesitation. Just 11 years of unchecked power, wearing a floral cardigan and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. What she didn't know, that robot was $47,000 of federally funded university research equipment. 3 HD cameras were uploading every frame of this, live, to a server 60 miles away. Renata Holbrook just picked the wrong guy to bully. What would you do? Drop your city below. Let me tell you who I am, because it matters. My name is Desmond Okafor Webb, 52 years old, retired Army logistics officer, 21 years of making sure the right equipment got to the right place at the right time. No excuses, no shortcuts. After I hung up the uniform, I took a job as facilities and robotics coordinator at Westfield Polytechnic University, a mid-sized state school in suburban Ohio. Decent salary, good people, meaningful work. I bought my house on Sycamore Glen Drive because of the driveway. I know that sounds strange, but when you've got a lower back injury from a deployment that never fully healed, the kind that makes carrying groceries from the car feel like a negotiation, you start paying attention to things like driveway slope and path clearance. My house had a wide, gently sloped driveway and a perfectly flat 30-foot concrete path running straight to the mailbox. Ideal terrain for Aria 3. Aria 3 is what the university calls an autonomous service robot, third prototype, about the size of a cooler on wheels, white ABS plastic shell, 4 omnidirectional wheels, a sensor array on top that looks like a tiny satellite dish got a little too confident. It's part of a 6-month real-world navigation study run by Westfield Poly's Department of Mechanical and Computer Engineering. But for me, practically speaking, it was the thing that picked up my mail and deliveries twice a day, without me having to negotiate with my lower back about it. I signed a research participation agreement with the university. They own Aria 3. My property is the testing environment. The robot runs at 8 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon, takes about 11 minutes per run, and has never, not once, crossed my property line by so much as an inch. That last part matters. Remember it. Sycamore Glen in late September smells like oak leaves going rust orange, and someone's dryer vent 2 houses down, with a faint diesel undertone from the school bus depot at the edge of the development. It's the kind of neighborhood that looks peaceful from the outside. Maintained lawns, matching mailboxes, American flags on exactly the right number of porches. And then there's Renata Holbrook, 4 houses down, colonial with a brass eagle over the front door. HOA board president for 11 consecutive years. 3 terms, each one won by a margin that suggested either genuine popularity or a very limited field of candidates willing to sit in the same room as her for 2 hours a month. Her voice carries. You can hear it through storm windows, that particular register of complaint that sounds like a smoke detector that learned passive aggression before it learned to detect smoke. Renata has run Sycamore Glen with a 3-ring binder and an iron certainty that the rules exist specifically for other people. She once fined a family $75 because a birthday balloon drifted into the common area. The balloon was yellow. It was somebody's kid's 7th birthday. She fined them anyway. Her friend, Bradford Colton III, board treasurer, lives on the corner, burns leaves in his backyard every October despite it being explicitly against county ordinance. Has never received a single violation notice in 11 years. Not one. I checked. I moved in on a Saturday. By Sunday evening, I had read all 94 pages of the HOA covenants, cover to cover, both appendices. Not because I was paranoid, because I'd spent 2 decades in the Army learning that the person who knows the rules best is the person who controls the room. 2 weeks after Aria 3 started its morning and afternoon runs, I came home to a certified letter on my kitchen table. Notice of violation, unauthorized commercial equipment on residential property. Fine, $200, payable within 15 days. I sat down. The garage was quiet, except for the low electric hum of Aria 3 on its charging dock. I reached for my yellow legal pad. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was interested. I want you to understand something about how I responded to that first violation notice. I didn't call Renata. I didn't knock on her door. I didn't post anything on the neighborhood Facebook group. I did what any retired Army logistics officer with a back injury, a research robot, and 94 pages of HOA covenants freshly memorized would do. I built a paper trail. I wrote a formal reply to Renata and the full HOA board. Certified mail, return receipt requested. 3 attachments. 1, a copy of the research participation agreement showing Westfield Polytechnic University as the legal owner of Aria 3, meaning it wasn't my commercial equipment, it wasn't even my equipment. It was a university's research asset temporarily stationed on my property. 2, a printed excerpt from the Ohio Revised Code, clarifying that a non-motorized research device does not meet the statutory definition of a vehicle under state law. 3, a photograph, time-stamped, GPS tagged, showing Aria 3 at its furthest point from the garage, still a full 8 inches inside my property line. I kept the green card when it came back signed. Here's the thing most people don't know about fighting an HOA. Every single communication needs to go certified mail with return receipt. That green card, the one that comes back with a signature on it, is evidence. A text message is not. An email can be disputed. A green card with a signature and a postmark is a fact. If you're ever in a dispute with an HOA or a landlord or anyone with institutional power over your property, certified mail is the cheapest legal protection you can buy. 3 days passed, no acknowledgement, no response. Then, a second violation notice arrived. This one cited Section 9.2 of the Sycamore Glen Covenants, nuisance devices, defined, in the elegant language of people who've never been questioned, as any item that causes concern or discomfort to a reasonable resident. Fine, $350. I want to pause here and appreciate the sheer audacity of Section 9.2. Concern or discomfort to a reasonable resident. It's the legal equivalent of, I don't like it. You could find a garden gnome under Section 9.2. You could probably find the concept of a garden gnome. I went to the next HOA board meeting. I brought my folder. I was polite. I presented my case clearly, with documentation, like a man who had done this kind of thing in front of superior officers for 2 decades and was not remotely intimidated by a folding table and a coffee urn. Renata cut me off 3 sentences in. We've made our determination, Mr. Okafor Webb. If you'd like to contest, you're welcome to submit a written appeal within 30 days. She smiled, that tight little smile, and moved to the next agenda item. The proposed new color palette for the neighborhood mailbox posts. Beige versus slightly darker beige. That was the next agenda item. I submitted my written appeal exactly as instructed, within the 30-day window, by certified mail, return receipt requested. Green card came back 6 days later. What Renata didn't realize, and this is where knowing all 94 pages pays off, is that by invoking the formal appeal process, she had also activated Section 17 of the HOA bylaws. Section 17 requires the board to hold a formal hearing within 45 days of receiving a written appeal, with a quorum, and written minutes. It's not optional, it's not discretionary, it's mandatory. The Sycamore Glen HOA board had not held a formal hearing in 6 years. They didn't have a functioning procedure for it. They had a folding table, a coffee urn, and a 3-ring binder. None of those things constitute a quorum. I didn't tell Renata any of this. I just set a reminder on my phone for 46 days out and waited. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was quietly taking sides. Not loudly, not publicly, just in the small ways that matter. Harriet Voss, a retired schoolteacher 3 doors down, had started waving at Aria 3 every morning from her porch, like it was a neighbor heading off to work. She'd named it Wally. 2 kids from the corner house had started leaving small arrangements of pebbles in a circle on the driveway, their version of a landing pad. Wally used it every day without acknowledgement, which somehow made it more charming. The neighborhood wasn't against me. They were just very accustomed to Renata. And accustomed people, in my experience, just need a reason to remember they have a choice. Aria 3 rolled out at 8 in the morning, rolled out again at 4 in the afternoon, right on schedule, every single day. 46 days after I submitted my appeal, I sent another certified mail letter to the HOA board. No anger, no accusations, just a polite, precise note citing Section 17, 4 of the Sycamore Glen bylaws, which states, in language that really doesn't leave much room for interpretation, that any appeal not heard within the required 45-day window is automatically resolved in the appellant's favor. Fines vacated. Matter closed. I attached a highlighted printout of Section 17.4, yellow highlighter, the relevant sentence, underlined once in pen. I am not a subtle man when it comes to documentation. I'd also had coffee the previous week with Simone Achterberg, a friend of mine who happened to pass the Ohio bar about 15 years ago and had been doing civil litigation ever since. I showed her the binder, all of it. She read quietly for about 20 minutes, set it down and said, "Desmond, they owe you money." Here's what most people don't know about HOA covenants. They're contracts, legally binding contracts. And contracts, as anyone who's ever been on the wrong end of one can tell you, cut both ways. The same document Renata was using to find me was the same document that required her to follow specific procedures she was now in default of. If your HOA is coming after you, read the covenants yourself, all of them. The people enforcing them often haven't. Renata received my Section 17.4 letter on a Tuesday. On Thursday of the following week, she called an emergency board meeting. The meeting notice was sent by email, less than 48 hours in advance, which is the minimum notice period under the bylaws, used here in the way a speed limit is used by someone who wants to go as fast as legally possible. The distribution list was the standard HOA roster, with one small edit. My address wasn't on it. In that meeting, the board voted 3-1 to amend Section 9, 2 of the covenants, retroactively, broadening the definition of nuisance device to explicitly include, and I'm quoting directly here, autonomous or semi-autonomous machinery of any kind. The vote took 11 minutes. They mailed me the amended covenant 4 days later with a new fine calculation attached. Total outstanding fines, with the retroactive application, $1,100. The one dissenting vote was cast by a board member named Clifton Price. He'd been on the board for 4 years. Quiet man. Voted yes on most things, but not this time. Now, here's where Renata made a mistake that people in positions of unchecked power make all the time. She assumed that because she'd always gotten away with something, she always would. She did not stop to consider whether retroactively amending a contract to target a specific resident, without notifying that resident, without a full homeowner vote, might be a problem. It is, in fact, a significant problem. Ohio Revised Code Section 5312 is pretty clear on this. Any amendment to community covenants that affects existing property use requires approval from a minimum percentage of all homeowners, not just the board, and affected residents must receive proper written notice before the amendment takes effect. Renata had neither of those things. She had a 3-1 board vote in a meeting I wasn't told about, amending a covenant to target activity that was already underway on my property. I underlined the statute number when I found it, circled it, added a small star in the margin. I was starting to fill up the second legal pad. About a week after the amended covenant arrived, on a Saturday morning when the neighborhood smelled like cold concrete and someone 2 streets over attempting to grill in November, there was a knock at my front door. Clifton Price, hands in his coat pockets, the look of a man who'd been thinking about something for a while and had finally decided to do it. He didn't say much. He handed me a manila folder. Then he said, "I'm not comfortable with what's happening." Inside the folder, 3 months of email chains between Renata Holbrook and Bradford Colton III. Detailed, specific, operational emails, coordinating the violation strategy, referencing my name, discussing, explicitly, how to force me to remove ARIA3 before the university study concluded. Because once the study was done and I no longer had the university's backing, they calculated I'd be easier to push around. I thanked Clifton, closed the door, sat down at the kitchen table. I now had documented evidence of bad faith. Coordinated, in writing, with names on it. Everything had just changed. I built what I started calling the fortress. Not a physical fortress, though honestly, given how this was going, I wouldn't have ruled it out. The fortress was a binder, then 2 binders, then 3, color-coded tabs, chronological order, every certified mail receipt, every violation notice, every return receipt green card, every highlighted statute, every time-stamped photograph, every GPS log from ARIA 3's onboard navigation system, which, as part of the research study, recorded every inch of every run. And now, in a brand new section behind a red tab, Clifton's email chains. I called Professor Yusuf Abernathy at Westfield Poly. He's the faculty lead on the ARIA 3 project, the kind of engineer who talks about sensor calibration the way other people talk about their kids. I laid out the situation, all of it. He listened without interrupting, which is either a sign of great patience or genuine alarm. And then he said 7 words that changed the temperature of the conversation. The university has a general counsel's office. While I was building the fortress, Renata was apparently deciding that subtlety was overrated. She began photographing ARIA 3 during every run, standing in the street, camera phone up, like she was documenting a crime in progress, which, given that ARIA 3 was rolling 11 minutes twice a day on a flat concrete path and causing approximately 0 problems for anyone, gave the whole performance a certain theatrical quality. She filed a complaint with the City Code Enforcement Office, submitting her photographs as evidence that ARIA 3 was an unmanned aerial vehicle in violation of local ordinances. ARIA 3 has 4 wheels. It has never, in 3 prototypes and 2 years of testing, left the ground. It is not now, nor has it ever been, an unmanned aerial vehicle. The city sent out an inspector named Gerald Tufts. Gerald arrived, looked at ARIA 3 for approximately 40 seconds, wrote NA, ground-based device, not subject to UAV ordinance, on his clipboard, and drove away with the energy of a man who had better things to do and was now slightly annoyed that he didn't get to do them. Renata did not take the hint. She sent an email to the Sycamore Glen neighborhood distribution list, the same one she'd conveniently left me off of during the emergency board meeting, expressing, and I'm being precise here because the precise wording matters, concerns about what data this device may be collecting as it moves through our shared community environment. She didn't say ARIA 3 was spying on people's children. She just said she had concerns about data and children in the same paragraph. It's an old trick. Imply the thing without saying the thing, so you can later claim you never said the thing. 2 days later, Harriet Voss knocked on my door and handed me a printed copy of the email. She'd written 3 words at the top in ballpoint pen. Thought you should see this. I looked up ARIA 3's data collection parameters in the university's IRB approval documentation. That's the Institutional Review Board, the body that approves all human subjects research and whose approval is a public record. ARIA 3 collects wheel odometry, obstacle distance measurements, and motor torque data. It does not have outward-facing cameras. It cannot record human beings. It has never recorded a single frame of any neighbor, child, adult, or household pet in Sycamore Glen. Renata's email was a materially false and misleading statement about my property and my professional activities, made to a community distribution list. And Section 22, one of the Sycamore Glen HOA covenants, which I had read in full on my second day in the house, explicitly prohibits board members from making exactly that kind of statement. She had just violated her own rule book, using her own distribution list. I photographed the email, added it to binder 3 behind the blue tab. That evening I walked ARIA 3's route myself. Just me, hands in my jacket pockets, the orange streetlights coming on one by one above the concrete path. October cold, the kind that presses through your jacket if you stand still long enough. I stood at the mailbox and looked back at my house. Every inch of the path was inside my property line, not a dispute anywhere, just a flat, concrete path, and a man who had read 94 pages of covenants and was very, very good at waiting. I breathed out, visible cloud of steam in the cold air, and went back inside. I had 3 binders, a university lawyer about to enter the conversation, and 43 days until the annual meeting. Professor Abernathy did what university researchers do when something threatens their work. He escalated through proper channels. He brought the situation to Westfield Polytechnic's Office of General Counsel as a standard protective measure. The attorney assigned to the matter was a woman named Petra Van Lith, University General Counsel, the kind of lawyer who speaks in complete sentences and never raises her voice because she's never needed to. She reviewed the case summary Abernathy provided, asked 3 clarifying questions, and then asked one more. What is the assessed value of the research equipment currently on site? Aria 3, $47,200. Federal grant attached to the 6-month navigation study, $150,000, funded by the National Science Foundation. Abernathy explained that under the grant terms, any damage to the equipment or disruption of the study required the university to file an incident report with the NSF. Vanlith noted this. Then she did something I hadn't asked her to do, and hadn't anticipated. She pulled the public records on the Sycamore Glen HOA. Standard due diligence. Routine. Takes about 20 minutes if you know where to look. What she found was not what anyone expected. The Sycamore Glen HOA is incorporated as a non-profit under Ohio law, which means its financial filings, IRS Form 990, filed annually, are public record, available to anyone. You don't need a lawyer to access them. You don't need a court order. You just need to know they exist and where to find them. The 990 filing showed that in 2019, the Sycamore Glen HOA had taken out a loan of $380,000 from a regional bank to fund 2 capital projects, a renovation of the community pool and the repaving of the main access roads. The projects were completed. The loan was not. The HOA had been making minimum payments ever since. That alone isn't unusual. What's unusual is what Vanlith found in Section 31 of the Sycamore Glen Covenant, the section that governs the HOA's financial obligations to its lender. Section 31 contains a default clause. It states that any legal judgment or sustained legal claim against the HOA may constitute a default event under the loan agreement, triggering the bank's right to demand full repayment immediately. Let that sit for a second. If I filed a civil suit against the HOA, which I now had substantial documented grounds to do, and if that suit resulted in a judgment against them, the bank could call the entire $380,000 loan due at once. The HOA would have to come up with that money from somewhere. The somewhere would be the homeowners, all 240 of them. Renata had been picking this fight on behalf of 240 households, using their collective financial exposure as her personal playground, and she had never once looked at Section 31. This is the thing about HOA public records. The 990 filings, the loan documents, the reserve fund audits. They're all accessible. Most residents never look. The people making decisions on their behalf sometimes don't either. In a dispute with your HOA, pulling those documents yourself could change everything you think you know about who actually has leverage. Vanlith called me on a Thursday evening. She walked me through what she'd found, calmly, the way you'd explain a weather forecast. I sat with it for 2 days. I hadn't gone looking for this. It had found me. And now I had to decide what to do with it. I called Simone Ochterberg on a Friday morning. Not for coffee this time. She came over that afternoon with a legal pad of her own, which I appreciated, a sign of professional seriousness. And we sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours, going through every document in the 3 binders, while Aria 3 hummed on its charging dock in the garage, and the November wind pushed dead leaves across the driveway outside. She read Clifton's emails twice. She read the retroactive amendment. She read the procedural default timeline. She read the Section 22. 1 violation, the city inspector's report, the IRB documentation. Then she put her pen down and said, "You have a bad faith breach of fiduciary duty claim, a covenant violation claim, a procedural default claim, and depending on what happens next, potentially a tortious interference claim with the university research contract." I asked her what that translated to in plain English. "It means she didn't just break the rules," Simone said. "She broke them on purpose, and you can prove it." She agreed to represent me on a contingency basis, meaning her fees come out of the settlement, not my pocket, when we win. Not if, when. That's the thing about a good attorney with a strong case. They stop using the word if fairly early in the conversation. When an HOA acts in documented bad faith, it stops being a neighbor dispute and becomes a tort claim. And attorneys take strong tort cases on contingency, which means you don't need money to fight back. You need documentation. While Simone was building the legal filing, Petra Vanlith was writing a letter. On Westfield Polytechnic University letterhead, signed by the institution's general counsel, addressed to Renata Holbrook, the full HOA board, and this is the part that matters, the HOA's own liability insurance carrier. The letter stated, in formal and precise language, that Area 3 was university property, protected under a federal research grant, that interference with its operation could constitute tortious interference with a contractual relationship, and that the university was formally monitoring the situation and preserving all relevant evidence. Preserving all relevant evidence is lawyer 4. We are getting ready, and everything you do from this point forward is going into a file. I upgraded my security system that same week. 2 4K cameras covering the full length of the driveway and the concrete path. A third wide-angle camera mounted on the garage facing the street. All 3 on continuous cloud backup, GPS-synced timestamps, uploading in real time to a third-party server. I also asked Professor Abernathy one specific favor. For the next 3 weeks, Area 3's onboard data would transmit live to the university's research archive. Read-only, immutable, time-stamped. The kind of record that holds up in court because nobody, not even the university, can edit it after the fact. I also notated the GPS coordinates of my property line on all 4 sides and sent them to Simone. Here's the thing about documentation that people underestimate. It's not just about having evidence after something goes wrong. It's about creating an environment where going wrong produces an automatic, irrefutable record. Cloud-backed footage with GPS timestamps isn't just security. It's primary evidence that's already authenticated before anyone asks for it. If you're in a situation where you know the other party is escalating, set up continuous cloud-backed recording with third-party storage. Local hard drives can be challenged. Cloud archives held by independent providers are significantly harder to dispute in court. In between all of this, I was having quiet conversations, not meetings, not rallies, just conversations, one at a time, at the mailbox and on the driveway, and once in the hardware store 2 miles away. Harriet Voss, who'd been watching Renata for 3 years and had her own file of irregularities she'd never known what to do with. The Thibodeau-Garcia couple, young engineers, 2 streets over, who'd been fined $90 for solar panels on their south-facing back roof, which is explicitly permitted under Ohio law. Renata had cited them under a covenant provision that didn't apply to their installation and hadn't bothered to check. And Darnell Osei, a retired firefighter who'd lived in Sycamore Glen for 9 years and had been quietly tracking something that made my 3 binders look like a grocery list. 11 documented cases of Renata applying the HOA rules inconsistently. Fines levied against residents of color at twice the rate of comparable violations by white residents. Same violations, different outcomes. 11 cases, with dates, fine amounts, and names. He'd never done anything with it. He was waiting for the right moment. The annual meeting was 19 days away. Renata could feel it. She couldn't have named exactly what she was sensing, but something in the neighborhood had shifted. Clifton Price had gone quiet in board email threads. Desmond hadn't responded to the last 2 violation notices. Neighbors who used to nod along when she raised her concerns at the mailbox now had a way of suddenly needing to check their phone or remember something they'd left on the stove. 11 years of social power is a finely tuned instrument, and hers was telling her something was wrong, so she accelerated. She went on the Sycamore Glen Neighbors Connect Facebook group, 340 members, the unofficial bulletin board of the neighborhood, and posted a lengthy message about Area 3. She referenced an autonomous vehicle accident in Arizona that had nothing to do with service robots, nothing to do with Ohio, and nothing to do with a 30-foot concrete path to a mailbox. She talked about the importance of community safety. She talked about protecting children. She talked at some length about the unregulated nature of robotic technology in residential settings. She never said Area 3 had hurt anyone. She just assembled the words robot, children, unregulated, and safety in the same paragraph, and let the reader do the work. Classic. Meanwhile, she reached out to Bradford Colton III, who knew someone at the regional HOA management company that oversaw several communities in the county. She wanted Desmond flagged in some kind of shared homeowner registry, a mechanism that, as far as anyone in actual HOA law could tell, does not exist. Bradford said he'd look into it. This is what Bradford did. He looked into things and reported back, and the reports were always slightly less useful than hoped. Then Bradford knocked on my door. It was a Tuesday evening. He was awkward about it in the way that people are awkward when they've been asked to do something they know is borderline. He stood on my porch in his barn coat and told me, in somewhat meandering terms, that the HOA would be willing to settle the outstanding violation notices for a reduced amount, and would be open to revisiting the covenant language around autonomous devices, if I would agree in writing to remove ARIA3 from the property and not pursue any legal claims against the board or its members. I let him finish, every word. Then I said, "I'd like that in writing, please." He said he hadn't brought anything in writing. "Then send me an email tonight summarizing what you just offered. I want to make sure I understand the terms correctly." He never sent the email. I didn't expect him to. What Bradford didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the moment he started talking about settlements, I had pressed record on my phone. Ohio is a one-party consent state. That means you can legally record a conversation you're part of without notifying the other person. I was part of that conversation. Every word Bradford said on my porch that evening went into an audio file that was backed up to cloud storage before he made it back to his car. In one-party consent states, and most of the U.S. is one-party consent, you can legally record any conversation you're participating in. Know your state's laws before a confrontation happens, not after. Simone Achterberg called me the following Friday evening. She'd been scrolling through the neighborhood Facebook group and had found Renata's post. She sent me a screenshot with 3 words in the message: defamation, in writing. Under Ohio law, publishing a false statement of fact to a third party that damages someone's professional reputation can constitute defamation. ARIA 3 had an IRB approval documenting its data collection parameters, a city inspector's report confirming it posed no regulatory concern, and a 2-year safety record without a single incident. Renata had publicly implied, in a named community forum with 340 members, that it was a safety hazard to neighborhood children. The post had 53 comments by the time I saw it, a few neighbors expressing concern, a few others pushing back. And there, at the top of the comments section, Harriet Voss had written 7 words. "Wally has never bothered anyone, not once." 26 likes. I added the screenshots to Binder 3, behind the new orange tab. The annual meeting was 10 days away. Everything I'd built, the binders, the cameras, the legal team, the community conversations, the audio recording sitting in my cloud backup, was in place. I just needed Renata to make one more mistake. I didn't have to wait long. I was in my office at Westfield Poly when it happened, 60 miles from home, laptop open on my desk, the university server's live feed running in a small window in the corner of my screen, the way it had been running every day for 3 weeks. A quiet, continuous stream of data from 3 cameras and ARIA 3's onboard system, uploading in real time to a read-only archive that nobody could touch after the fact. 4:12 p.m. ARIA 3 rolled out of the garage for its afternoon run. 8 minutes in, right on schedule. Rolling down the concrete path toward the mailbox, sensor array rotating slowly, doing exactly what it had been doing twice a day for 2 months without incident. And then I watched Renata Holbrook drive her golf cart off the street, over the curb, onto my private driveway, and straight into my robot at full speed. Crack. I heard it through the laptop speakers. Across 60 miles of fiber and cloud infrastructure, I heard the fiberglass crack. I watched a RIA 3 cartwheel into the mailbox post. I watched the sensor array, the part that represents 2 years of calibration work by a team of graduate students, shear off and slide across the concrete. ARIA 3's data stream ended at 4:13:07 p.m. Renata stepped out of the cart, looked down at $47,000 of federal research equipment destroyed on my private property, straightened her cardigan, and drove home. I sat at my desk for about 15 seconds, just watching the frozen feed. 2 years of work, my back's best assistant, gone in 4 seconds because a woman in a floral cardigan decided the rules she enforced on everyone else didn't apply to her today. Then I picked up my phone. 4:14 p.m. I called 911. I need to report willful destruction of private property. 4:15 p.m. I called Simone. She didn't say hello. She said, "Don't touch the robot. Don't go outside. Stay on the phone and tell me everything." 4:17 p.m. Simone called Petra Van Lith. 4:19 p.m. Petra Van Lith activated Westfield Polytechnic University's legal protocol for damaged federal grant equipment and notified the National Science Foundation incident line. 5 minutes. That's how long it took for this to go from a neighborhood dispute to a federal research incident with the university's full legal apparatus engaged and a mandatory NSF report in motion. 2 officers arrived at my house at 4:24 p.m. I was on the highway by then, but Simone met them at the property. She showed them the camera footage on my laptop, which she'd remoted into. They watched it once, then they watched it again. Then one of them drove 4 houses down and knocked on Renata's door. She answered in the same cardigan. She told them Aria 3 had been in the roadway. It was on my private driveway, a fact visible from 3 camera angles. She said she'd been startled. She had steered deliberately off the road and accelerated, also visible from 3 camera angles. The officers were professional and patient, and clearly not having their best Tuesday. Renata Holbrook was issued a citation for criminal damaging under Ohio Revised Code Section 2909.06, second-degree misdemeanor. Court date attached. The officers photographed the destroyed robot. The photograph went into a police report. The police report became a public record. Everything she'd done, from the golf cart to the cardigan to the sneer, was now officially documented by the state of Ohio, not just by my cameras. I got home at 6:30 p.m. Aria 3's pieces were still on the driveway. I stood there in the cold for a while, looking at them. The sensor array, the cracked chassis, the wheel assembly weirdly intact, like it hadn't gotten the message yet. That evening, I drafted an email to every homeowner in the Sycamore Glen HOA, all 240 addresses from the official roster Clifton had provided. No dramatics, no accusations, just facts, clearly stated, the police report case number, a summary of the HOA's procedural violations, and the loan default exposure Van Lith had identified. Darnell Osei's enforcement data, attached as a PDF with his permission, and an invitation to attend the annual meeting, which was now 5 days away. I closed with one sentence. I think it is important that homeowners understand the full situation before electing board members who will manage this community's finances and legal standing. By morning, the Sycamore Glen Neighbors Connect Facebook group had 61 new comments. The tenor had changed entirely. The annual meeting was 5 days away. The Sycamore Glen Community Clubhouse smells like industrial carpet cleaner and old coffee, and the particular sadness of fluorescent lighting at 7 in the evening, folding chairs arranged in rows, a projector screen no one had turned on in 3 years, a folding table at the front with a coffee urn that had been brewing since 5 and was well past the point of redemption. 94 homeowners showed up. For context, last year's annual meeting had 22. The year before, 17. This was not a neighborhood famous for its civic engagement, but 61 Facebook comments and an email about loan default clauses will do things to turn out that no amount of free coffee ever could. I was in the 3rd row. Simone Ochterberg was in the 4th. Petra Van Lith, who had driven 2 hours from Westfield Poly that evening, which tells you something about how seriously the university was taking this, was in the 5th. Darnell Osei sat in the 2nd row, with his folder open on his lap, relaxed, the way a man is relaxed when he's been waiting 9 years for the right moment, and can feel it finally arriving. Harriet Voss was 3 seats to my left. The Thibodeau Garcias were in the back. Renata Holbrook was at the board table. Blazer over the cardigan tonight, prepared agenda in front of her, printed and tabbed. Bradford Colton III was beside her, looking like a man who had recently developed an interest in studying the grain of the folding table. Clifton Price sat at the far end, hands folded, expression unreadable. Renata called the meeting to order at 7:03 p.m. She moved to approve the previous meeting's minutes like nothing had happened, like the email hadn't gone out, like the Facebook group hadn't been on fire for 5 days, like there wasn't a police report with her name on it, filed with the county court. She moved through the approval with the practiced confidence of someone who had run this meeting for 11 years without once being interrupted by reality. At 7:08 p.m., the clubhouse door opened. A man in a gray jacket walked in, carrying a manila envelope. Calm, professional. He looked around the room, found his target, and walked to the board table. Renata Holbrook? She looked up. He placed the envelope on the table in front of her. She opened it. Inside, a civil lawsuit filed by Westfield Polytechnic University against Renata Holbrook personally and against the Sycamore Glen Homeowners Association for destruction of university research property, $47,200, tortious interference with a federally funded research contract valued at $150,000, and defamation of a university research program. Also inside, a separate filing by Desmond Okafor Webb through counsel Simone Ochterberg for bad faith covenant enforcement, unlawful retroactive amendment in violation of Ohio Revised Code Section 5312, procedural default under Section 17.4, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The room was very quiet. The coffee urn hissed once and went silent. Petra Van Lith stood up. Not dramatically, just to be heard. She addressed the room in plain language, the way a doctor explains a diagnosis to a family that didn't know there was anything wrong. She explained the HOA's outstanding loan. She explained Section 31. She explained that the university's claim alone, before Desmond's separate filing, potentially met the threshold to trigger the default clause, giving the bank the right to demand full repayment of $380,000 from an organization that operated on homeowner dues. "I'm not here to punish this neighborhood," she said. "I'm here because you deserve to know what decisions have been made in your name." A man in the back row who had lived on the street for 23 years raised his hand and asked for the total exposure number. Van Lith gave it. It was not a small number. 3 people in the room did the math on what that meant per household and looked like they needed a moment. Then Darnell Osai stood up. He didn't perform. He just opened his folder and read. 11 cases, dates, violation types, fine amounts, demographic information from the HOA roster, cross-referenced with public records. The pattern didn't need explanation. It was right there in the numbers, laid out in Darnell's steady, unhurried voice. A 9-year record of a rule being applied to some people and not others, and the demographic line between those two groups being exactly what you'd expect it to be. Nobody erupted. There was just silence, the kind that means people are doing math of a different sort. Clifton Price set down his pen, looked at the room, and made a motion. Vacate all outstanding fines against Desmond Okafor Webb, void the retroactive Section 9.2 amendment, and call an immediate vote of no confidence in the HOA board president. He needed a second. He got 4. Simultaneously, from different corners of the room. The vote was 71 to 11. Renata Holbrook sat at the board table for a long moment after the count was announced. Then she gathered her prepared agenda, the one about the mailbox color palette, tucked it under her arm, and walked out. The door swung shut behind her. Outside, cold November air, wood smoke from somewhere 2 streets over. The same neighborhood it had always been, just with 11 years of accumulated weight, finally, visibly, lifted off it. The legal aftermath was swift and, honestly, satisfying in the clean way that things are satisfying when they go exactly the way the paperwork said they would. Renata's criminal damaging citation resulted in a plea to a lesser charge, a fine of $2,500 and 40 hours of community service. Her personal attorney fees for the civil matter, according to neighbors with access to court filings, exceeded $18,000. The university's civil suit was settled before trial. The HOA's liability insurance covered ARIA 3's replacement value and a portion of the research disruption costs. Renata resigned from the HOA board within 10 days of the annual meeting, not gracefully, but completely. My fines were vacated in full. The retroactive Section 9.2.
So that's where it ended. Renata walked out that clubhouse carrying an agenda about those bacalas. Behind her, a processoral paperwork, a 71 to 11 vote, and 11 years of unchecked power, gone in one evening. Here's what stayed with me about Desmond's story. He didn't win because he got lucky. He won because he was prepared before he needed to be. He read 94 pages nobody read. He sent 35 mails when everyone else sent texts. He built the record quietly, patiently, without once raising his voice. And when Renata finally made her move, every single piece was already in place. That's not a legal trick. That's a decision to take your situation seriously before it becomes a crisis. People like Renata exist everywhere. A little authority, zero accountability, and the slow belief that the rules are for the other people. What they never count on is someone who done the homework. Desmond did the homework. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with someone like this? A fight that made no sense. A rule that's only applied to you. A board that's confused having power with being right. Drop it in the comments. Every story matters. If this one hit close to home, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to HOA Stories because the next one involves a retired judge, a fence, and an HOA board that had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. Same energy, different outcome. See you there.